All right. Hi, everyone. We are going to give it a minute or two before we get started, just so everyone has a chance to get into the webinar here. So we'll get started in just a moment.
Okay, I think I'll get things started here. It looks like we've got a number of people on the call now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Rebecca Deek-Storms. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at the town of Oakville. So today's meeting is one in a series of public information sessions to discuss the feasibility and funding options that are out there to replace and repair our aging stormwater infrastructure here in the town. It's really important to us that we hear from non-residential property owners and businesses on these various funding options. So we really appreciate you joining and participating with us today. There's also a non-residential property survey available that we will send out to everyone after the session if you have any additional feedback that you'd like to give when things have completed. Just to give everyone a sense of the timeline of the project, the final recommendations are expected to go to council in spring of next year. So there's no decisions made today. This is sort of an information session and to gain your feedback. There will be another round of engagement, I believe, around March of 2025. So if there's additional feedback at that time, you'd be invited to participate again. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alicia Evans from AECom, who's going to run the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca said, my name is Alicia Evans. I am a facilitator with AECom, and I'll be the moderator for today's meeting. As we get started, I'd like to read the land acknowledgement. So as Oakville, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations. From the lands of the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron and Haudenosaunee, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in First Nations history. As we gather today on the sacred lands of Treaties 14 and 22, we are in solidarity with Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect Mother Earth, the original nations of the trees and plants, the four-legged, the flyers, the finned, and the crawlers, as the original stewards of Mother Earth. We acknowledge and give gratitude to the waters as being life and being sacred, and to the carriers of those water teachings, the females. We acknowledge and give gratitude for the wisdom of the grandfathers and the four winds that carry the spirits of our ancestors that walked this land before us. The town of Oakville is located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the treaty holders, for being water stewards of this traditional territory. So there's just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to review before we get to the agenda. So as you may have noticed, we are using Zoom's webinar platform today. In this platform, all attendees are muted and you will not have access to your video. So this means that we invite your participation through the Q&A box. Now you can access this feature through the menu bar by hovering your mouse over the screen. If you are using a tablet or smartphone, you can just simply tap on the screen and this option should appear. No other attendees will be able to see the questions, and there's also an option to submit the questions anonymously to the project team. Now we know that technology can be a challenge or can create issues sometimes, so we appreciate your patience with us if there's any problems. And of course, if you are having any issues, please feel free to also use the Q&A feature to ask for help. So Dylan will be monitoring this throughout the meeting and will do his best to help you. And finally, the webinar is also being recorded. As I mentioned, all Q&A will remain anonymous to avoid any privacy concerns. So the purpose of the meeting today is to introduce the stormwater fee feasibility study and to answer your questions. So following this introduction, there will be an overview presentation that introduces stormwater and stormwater management, including the town's 30-year stormwater management needs. The team will present why the town needs to consider new ways to pay for stormwater management and how the stormwater fee feasibility study will help to identify a recommendation. The team will outline the different funding options under consideration and how those funding options could affect non-residential property owners. The team will also provide information about different incentive program options for property owners that implement good stormwater management practices. And finally, the team will share how you can participate further in this study. Following the presentation, there will be time to address your questions. Please feel free to ask your questions throughout the meeting using the Q&A feature, but we will hold off addressing or responding to them until after the presentation. We are scheduled, this meeting is scheduled to go until 2:30 today, so we do have time available for questions if you have them. All right, so just a quick introduction of the project team who is joining us today. So from the town of Oakville, we have Catherine Hewitson, who is the Director of Asset Management. We have Paul Allen from Infrastructure and Asset Management Planning. I'm not sure if Phoebe is on the line right now. So I'm not sure if Phoebe's able to join. It doesn't look like that's the case. And then, of course, Rebecca Deek-Storms, who has introduced, who did the introduction already. And Rebecca is the Director of Economic Development. The town has also engaged AECOM to help complete the study. So from AECOM, we have Pippi Warburton, who is the project manager. And I will kick it off now to, hand it off to Pippi to start the presentation.
Thanks, Alicia, and everyone, and thanks for having me. It's nice to be here today with everyone talking about the subject that we know very well. So Alicia, myself, and the rest of the project team at AECOM have undertaken probably 20 of these studies across Canada for lots of municipalities and have this experience. One thing I always say is that every municipality is unique and different, and Oakville is certainly no different there, that we've discovered lots about Oakville and got to know each other well. Okay, so next slide, Alicia, thanks. So we're going to start with the basics. What is stormwater? I think everyone probably knows that stormwater is the rain or the snow melt. It's the water that travels across the surface. So sometimes I like to mention that it's not the drinking water that comes in your pipes, pressurized and chlorinated from the water treatment plant. That's measured by the meters in your property, and you pay based on how much your meter has said you've used. And it's also not the wastewater that goes to the sanitary sewers that's coming from the washing machines, the toilets, the sinks, that goes to the wastewater treatment plant. That's also paid for based on your measured amount that's metered of the amount of water you intake your property. So stormwater is harder to measure. We can't put a meter on it. So how do we look at it? We look at it based on the differences in stormwater in nature, where it's infiltrating into the ground and being absorbed by plants and trees and the natural environment, and compare that to the infiltration process. Next slide, thanks. The infiltration that happens in the built landscapes, where you have these more impervious areas, roofs, asphalt, concrete, and those kind of paved areas that have much more runoff, certainly much more flashy runoff. And as a result of more paved and built areas, we can tend to see more flash flooding. And there's also the oil and grit that comes off those kind of properties, those kind of hard landscapes that needs to be treated and dealt with as well. So when we talk about the impervious areas, that's our best estimation and of sort of approximating the amount of runoff that's coming from a property. and thus contributing to the storm infrastructure that the town maintains. Next slide. So I think stormwater tends to fly under the radar for a lot of people, often out of sight, out of mind until something goes wrong. So if a stormwater system is not managed properly, we get erosion in our creeks, ditches, and channels. Erosion needs to be monitored, and then if it becomes a problem, it needs to be fixed. Debris in channels and creeks and ditches and inlets. Often the town will go out before a big storm is predicted to make sure all those inlets are cleaned out and ready to receive the storm inflows. Pollutants in the creeks and the lake, for sure, that gets monitored as well. And Bell's alarm when we see an increase in a toxicity or turbidity. And that gets monitored and cleanups, emergency cleanups, as well as investigations to figure out where the contaminants are coming from. Of course, flooding happens all the time. Our roads are designed to convey the major flows. It's supposed to drain down after a short period of time. So we see flooding occasionally, especially if those inlets get clogged. That needs to be dealt with, either the damage after the flood or emergency works during the flood itself. Basement flooding, surcharging in the system, infrastructure failures that haven't been maintained. Sometimes if a culvert or a sewer collapses, you can get sort of a catastrophic failure. If it hasn't been maintained properly, it can be much more expensive than infrastructure that is maintained well. Next slide. So I think most people who live in a municipality are always shocked to know how much infrastructure they have in their town, that the town is managing on their behalf, which makes up the stormwater system. So Oakville is no different. If you put the ditches and the storm sewers end to end, you would have close to 1,000 kilometers going all the way from Mississauga all the way to Quebec City. So it's an enormous amount of linear infrastructure that needs to be inspected, maintained daily. You've got 156 kilometers of creeks that need to be maintained and inspected, over 8 kilometers of shorelines, over 30,000 catch basins, 67 ponds, and the total value is approximately $963 million. And that doesn't include your natural assets. So there's a vast amount of stormwater infrastructure in the town of Oakville that your city staff are maintaining behind the scenes on your behalf. Next slide. So I think I've already touched on some of these things, but just to sort of emphasize the amount of work that goes into maintaining the stormwater services, there's asset management planning, so determining how often assets need to be visited and eyes on to make sure that they don't fail without us planning for it. The flood risk and asset condition audits, infrastructure inspections, cleaning, repairs, renewals and upgrade. Climate resiliency improvements have been identified throughout the town, emergency response, obviously, and then lots of monitoring, pre and post development, water quality, flow and erosion monitoring is happening all over the town as well. Next slide. So part of the capital, what I was speaking about before, sort of operations and maintenance, but the capital programs, obviously, there's lots of capital programs that they have to budget for. So repair and renew of the storm system, the minor and the minor system and the culverts, the major system, monitoring and rehabilitation of channels and lakeshore erosion, clean out of sediment ponds. All those stormwater management ponds are really only effective if the sediment is removed from them regularly. So they're intended to trap that sediment, but it needs to be removed regularly. Some need to be cleaned out every year, some every 5 years. And it's very expensive to dispose of that sediment as well. It's not usually clean sediment that can just go to a landfill. Maintaining the bioswales and all those natural channels, trees, the tree pits and that sort of thing. Implementation of solutions to protect floodplain along the creeks and of course along the lake, maintaining the outlets, ditch renewals and improvements along Bronte Harbor shoreline. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen here to talk about the rain water management financial plan. Thanks, Kathleen.
Sure, thanks, Pippi. So over the past number of months, the town has been exploring options for a sustainable funding source to ensure that our stormwater infrastructure is maintained in a good state of repair, and also that we can afford to make improvements to adapt to climate change. The objectives of the funding source are to find one that's equitable, simple to understand, and provides financial sustainability. Next slide. So the staff first introduced the rainwater management plan to council in March of 2023 when we presented the townwide rainwater management plan roadmap, which outlined all the work and the steps involved in this plan. The intent of this rainwater management plan has been to review all our stormwater infrastructure needs and natural assets and apply a risk, cost benefit, and service impact lens to those needs. In order to be able to develop a prioritized long-term plan for all those stormwater needs and develop a supporting financial plan. Next slide. So as I said, the rainwater management plan has been a multi-phase plan with the objective to provide an integrated approach to the planning and implementing of all our stormwater infrastructure needs into the future. The objective being to review the variety of competing needs and assess the risks and the benefits and create that prioritized plan that's phased over 30 years. So as you can see in this slide, the project involved 3 phases, and the work actually began in 2022 when we pulled all of our stormwater infrastructure condition assessment audits and the development of our asset management plans, as well as there's also been a number of different studies, a stormwater master plan, riverine studies, a harbor risk assessment that's looking at the more intense storms and what the improvements could be made. So we pulled all of those different studies and asset management plans together across the board for all those different assets as well that Pippi mentioned. So we aren't just focusing on one sort of asset type like storm pipes or creeks. We're looking at everything. And then we prioritize all those different projects to create that long-term 30-year plan. So our work, we have reported 3 different times to council. The first one was in March of 2023, where we developed the roadmap. And then in July 2023, that's where we reported the total 30-year needs and the long-term plan. We also followed up with some additional information of September 2023. So we're now in phase 3 of the project. And this phase really includes the development and assessment of the funding options to support the delivery of this long-term plan. And this phase also includes the public engagement as well as development of the implementation plan of a new fee if we're going down that road. Next slide. So based on the work that we did in phase 1 of the rainwater management plan, we found there are really 2 distinct streams of work, totaling $732 million over those 30 years. Each stream addresses different needs, service objectives, and they also have different risks associated with them. So the first area of need was addressing those life cycle needs. And this represents our ongoing maintenance and inspections, as well as the life cycle renewal and rehab work that's required over the long term to ensure our assets are maintained in a good state of repair. So the total for this category of work is about $351 million over the 30-year term, or on average about $11.7 million per year. The second group of work, or stream 2 as we call it, is the work we've identified to help adapt to climate change. And it includes sorry, all of the recommendations that have come out of those various master plans and riverine studies that looked at the modeling of those more intense extreme weather events, such as like 100-year storm, and what improvements could be made to help protect our infrastructure and the town into the future. So the total for all of those category of needs is $365 million. Or on average, sorry, I would think it's about $12 million. Overall, when we look across the 30 years combined, we need on average about $24 million per year. And I think with that, I hand it back over to Pippi. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so we've heard a lot about why we need to fund stormwater infrastructure and the work that's been done to come up with the cost of what we think it will cost to properly fund the infrastructure. But let's talk about now how we pay for our stormwater in the town of Oakville. Next slide. So currently, stormwater is paid for through your municipal taxes. And as we know, taxes are based on the assessed value of the home. So really nothing to do with how much stormwater is coming off a property, just the assessed value of the home. And the town is currently collecting the municipal taxes from residential and non-residential properties. And the total amount is coming mostly from residential properties. So we can see with this pie chart, it's about 73% of the taxes collected are coming from residential properties, with 27 coming from the non-residential properties. So currently around 4% of the total taxes collected go towards the current stormwater program. Okay, next slide. So this pie chart is an estimation of how much runoff is coming from residential versus non-residential properties. So how we come up with that amount is we calculate the runoff area. So the runoff area is the property size multiplied by a runoff coefficient that's associated with the property type. The runoff coefficient comes from the city's engineering design guidelines. All municipalities have runoff coefficients associated with different property types, and they're used by engineers to come up with flows from different types of properties and used to size bridges, culverts, sewers, anything related to stormwater runoff. So if we look at this pie chart, we can see that only 44% of the runoff area in the town of Oakville is residential, where 56% is coming from the non-residential properties. So part of the motivation for looking at different ways to fund stormwater is to say that the current method of paying for stormwater through taxes based on assessed value is not the most equitable way that we can fund stormwater. Next slide. Next slide. So the town, like many towns across Ontario and Canada, in fact, North America, is reviewing its current funding model, property taxes, and exploring new ways to fund its stormwater services and support the climate change resiliency program that they've identified. The Ontario government also has passed Ontario regulation for asset management planning for municipalities that requires municipalities to have an asset management plan in place for all of their critical infrastructure and also provide a sustainable funding mechanism for those assets. So the town of Oakville is also motivated to reassess their funding mechanism for stormwater based on these things. And like I was saying, we've worked with many municipalities across Ontario and Canada to help them look at new funding mechanisms. And we'll talk a bit about that in next slides. Next slide. So as we were looking at different options for the town, we developed some guiding principles to evaluate the different options. First and foremost, is it fair and equitable? So is it non-discriminatory, and does it actually reflect the usage? As you're paying for the water that comes to your house for drinking water, you measure it through a meter, so it's very fair. So we're trying to look at something that's as fair and equitable as possible, something that's affordable and financially sustainable, something that's justifiable, something that will give the town the climate change resiliency and help it implement some of its climate change ambitions, and something that's simple to understand and manage, so not too complicated, and that we can also manage with relative ease. Next slide. So this study's been going on for a little bit now, and we've been working with the town to look at the background information, come up with lots of alternatives to be discussed internally. We've looked at best practices, what other municipalities are doing. We've had some presentations to the council and discussions with various senior staff members at the town. And through this, at this point, we're starting this public engagement process where we've had our first public meetings in the last few weeks, and we're reaching out to the non-residential community here today to gather input on the study to date. So the information and the work that we've done to date. We'll talk a little bit more about the study schedule at the end of this presentation, but it's not the final recommendations will be going to council until next year. So we have lots of time still for input, and that's what we're here for today. Next slide. Okay, so stormwater funding options. So the ones that we've looked at and that we're going to talk about in more detail today. So option one is the existing property tax system. So that's keeping it on the taxes, maybe creating a new tax levy that's specifically for stormwater, but keeping it on the property taxes, meaning that you'd pay proportional to your assessed value of your property. That's the existing conditions. We always like to have that as the sort of control. And then option two, the tiered flat stormwater fee. So this means that properties would be divided into tiers, and that everybody within that property tier would pay the same amount. Property owners would pay based on the average runoff area for that particular tier. So you could see that would be simpler to manage, only having 3 tiers, but might not be as equitable because there could be big differences within the tiers. Okay, and then the third one is a variable storm rate based on stormwater runoff. So fees would be based on the estimated stormwater runoff of each individual property. So owners would pay based on the measured runoff area of their property. So you could see that would be more equitable, but maybe a little bit more laborious to implement. Okay, next slide. So how are these property types divided? So we have the 3 main property types or tiers that we're talking about: the high density residential, low density residential, and non-residential. High density residential includes duplexes all the way up to 6plexes, townhouses, multifamily homes, condominiums, apartments. The low density residential are single family detached homes, semi-detached, link homes, and farms are also included in that tier. And then non-residential are parks, commercial, industrial, institutional, government, mixed use, miscellaneous, and undeveloped. Next slide. Runoff calculated. The stormwater runoff is calculated using the runoff coefficients that come from the development engineering guidelines for the municipality. So in Oakville, we've shown them in this table here. So for low density residential, the runoff coefficient is 0.7. So it's a number between 0 and 1, with 0 being no runoff comes from the property, and 1 meaning all runoff comes from the property. So farms would be 0. High density residential 0.8, and you can see industrial and commercial 0.9. They're getting higher, meaning they're mostly paved. That is indicating that most of the runoff runs off those properties. The runoff area multiplies the size of the property in square meters multiplied by the runoff coefficient, and that gives us the runoff area. We have a few tweaks that we've made through discussions with the city and through the project so far. So farms and parks have been altered from 0 to 0.35, and the average, medium, and high density residential runoff coefficients values are 0.75 and 0.85. Next slide. So if we look at the distribution based on the assessed value, we showed this earlier, but I've included the 3 tiers here. So instead of just the 2 residential and non-residential, now you can see non-residential in black, that's the same, 27% of the taxes collected are coming from the non-residential properties. And then in the blue, the high density residential is 13%. So 13% of the taxes collected come from high density residential properties, and 60% are coming from low density residential. So if we kept it in the tax-based system based on assessed value, that's the same proportion that you'd pay towards stormwater. If we move to a distribution based on runoff area, it would look more like on the right. So the non-residential properties contribute 56% of the runoff area within the town of Oakville. Low density residential 38 and high density residential 6. So that's based on calculations that we've done using the town's GIS data, looking at the average parcel sizes, the total parcel sizes multiplied by their associated runoff coefficients. So we can see that if we kept it on the tax method, the low density residential properties would be paying 14.6 million. And through the runoff method, they'd be paying 9.3 million. High density residential would go from 3.2 million to 1.5. And non-residential would go from 6.6 million to 13.7 million. Next slide. So let's look at some examples now of what this would actually mean for some non-residential properties. So we're looking at the small business on the side, and you can see the property area. The small, probably mom and pop shop is 165 square meters. You can see from the photograph, it's all paved. The one in the middle is a property area of approximately 8,000 square meters, also mostly paved. And then you can see the one on the right, the large area, over 33,000 square meters. And again, almost entirely paved. Because they're all in the non-residential property class, they all have the same runoff coefficient of 0.9. They have very different assessed values. So you can see the small one has an assessed value of just $500,000. The middle-sized one there in the middle is over $4 million. And the large property on the right is over $14 million. So if we look at the 3 options we've been discussing on how they would pay for the stormwater, based on the needs described by Catherine, the $24 million a year, if they were paying through property taxes based on assessed value, the small business on the left would pay $268 a year. The middle property would pay $2,415 per year. And the large property would pay $8,203 per year. Because it's a tiered flat rate, using that tiered flat method, they would all pay the same amount based on the average. So you can see that for the non-residential properties, a tiered flat rate makes a big difference. The small property owner is paying almost $3,000, same as the medium-sized property, same as the large-sized property. But a variable rate makes a huge difference. The variable rate, again, that's based on the property size multiplied by the runoff coefficient. So it's proportional to your runoff area. Using the variable method, the small business would just pay $73 a year, medium size $3,000, and the large commercial lot $12,500. Okay, next slide. So we'll just quickly look at pros and cons. I think some of these are quite self-evident. Option 1, keeping it on the property tax. It's generally accepted by the public. It's simple to administer. There's no cost in changing. And you can designate funds to a stormwater levy. The cons are the property assessment doesn't correlate to the property's runoff. High distribution of residential to non-residential properties is not really considered equitable. tax exempt properties are also not included, whereas they could be under other methods. And annual budget pressures to maintain the minimal tax increases. So we would continue to see the stormwater program being underfunded as it has been chronically in Ontario and across Canada for decades. It's difficult to implement incentive programs if you use the tax property method, and we're going to talk about incentive programs in the next coming slides. And it would require a tax increase to get the desired funding amount. Next slide. So some pros and cons of the tiered flat stormwater fee. So it's more equitable than the tax system. It's fairly easy to understand, and it's easy to implement when stormwater incentive programs. It's unfair for small businesses, though. This would not be equitable across all non-residential properties, and it's higher administrative cost than the current system. Next slide. So option 3 obviously is the most equitable. It's easy to implement incentive programs. The results in lower fees for small non-residential properties versus the tax method. But it does have the highest administrative cost to implement and run. Okay, next slide. So using those guiding principles that we discussed earlier, we did evaluate with the project team these 3 methods, and you can see this evaluation presented in this table here. One thing I would point out that it is possible to have a blend of these different calculation methods. For example, you could have a tiered flat rate for residential and a variable rate for the non-residential properties, and that's also something we'd like to consider moving forward. Next slide. Okay, we're going to talk quickly about incentive programs. And incentive programs become very important to non-residential properties, especially large ones that are going to see an increase in their stormwater contributions. So many municipalities are providing incentive programs to property owners, and there's 2 main types. There's credit programs, which are ongoing fee reductions based on some actions that you can implement on your property. And then there's rebates. Rebates are a one-time reward for implementing an on-site method. Rebates that we often come first to mind are things like rain barrels. You might get a rain barrel paid for. You could have a site inspection done by a landscape architect to help you design a rain garden on your property, that type of thing. So who qualifies? Property owners who reduce the stormwater runoff on their property or improve the quality of stormwater runoff from their property could qualify for these incentive programs. As we move forward in the study, we will be doing more consultation on incentive programs. So we'll just cover them quickly here, but we'll definitely be coming back to the public for more input on incentive programs as we move the study forward. Next slide. So this is just another slide sort of emphasizing the difference between credits and rebates. So credits for facilities that provide flood and erosion control or water quality treatment. So you think about a stormwater pond on your property. It traps sediment, which is great, and it also reduces the peak flow coming from the property. So it stores that water and then releases it slowly to the system once capacity has become available after the storm has subsided. So maximizing the utility of the storm system. So other environmental benefits that are non-facility measures, like activities that promote good housekeeping practices. We've even seen some municipalities provide credits for education programs. But for non-residential properties, you're probably familiar with things like oil grit separators in your parking lots, tanks that hold water to reduce the peak flows, and ponds. So all of those things would qualify for credits for non-residential properties, provided that you show that they were installed properly and that they are being maintained. So credits also have a higher cost to implement. So most municipalities choose to implement credits for non-residential properties and not so much for residential properties, because the credit really is only going to be dollars a month for residential properties. So the cost to administer it doesn't become doesn't realize its value. But for non-residential properties, it can be very valuable and very important. So that's often how that goes. And then rebates or subsidies we often see for one-time financial support, how-to advisory services, published information documents, or discount prices. Sometimes municipalities will get bulk permeable pavement stones, for example, for people to buy at a discounted rate, that kind of thing. Next slide. So we wanted to give you some information just to know that this is not a new idea, and it's being done in lots of municipalities across the country and certainly in Ontario. So we've got a few examples for you here today. So in Kitchener, non-residential properties are have a stormwater fee, and non-residential properties are charged in tiers based on ranges of impervious area. And a medium non-residential property, for example, pays about $250 a month. The maximum credit they're eligible for is up to 45%. And non-residential and multi-residential properties are applicable for the credit programs. In Mississauga, they also have they've had the stormwater fee in place for a long time. So multi-residential properties and non-residential properties are charged based on impervious area of their property. They pay $116, almost $117 per year per 267 square meters of impervious area. So they measure the impervious area of all the non-residential and multi-residential properties to do that calculation. Those properties are they have a maximum credit of up to 50% of their fee they can apply for, and they can non-residential and multi-residential units above 2 units can apply for that credit. City of Guelph, similarly, they've had their stormwater fee in place for quite a while now. Non-residential properties are charged based on impervious area of their property, and they pay about $7.60 per month per 180 square meters of impervious area. They can apply for up to a 50% credit, and non-residential and multi-residential units are able to apply for that credit. Next slide. So what kind of credits do they have? So this is Kitchener's credit program. If you have peak flow reduction, so that's usually a tank or a stormwater pond, super pipe sometimes that delays that peak flow, so we don't get the major flooding, the flash flooding that we often see. It's based, the credit is based on the percent of impervious area that's directed to an approved quantity control facility. And you can get up to 25% for that credit. And then the runoff volume reduction, that's usually something like infiltration. So infiltration galleries, rain gardens, permeable pipes, that kind of thing that actually infiltrates the water back into the groundwater. And you can get 25% credit for that. Water treatment, again, that could be ponds, oil grit separators are probably the most likely things, but we are seeing some green infrastructure that does water quality treatment is more common now. So rain gardens, grass swales, that type of thing as well. And then there's operations and activities that also can qualify for a further 5% credit in Kitchener. Things like education programs for employees, public students, that kind of thing. Next slide. Okay, some details about Mississauga's credit program. So again, peak flow reduction aligned with the city's current development requirements. So watershed and subwatershed level, you can get up to a 40% discount of your program there, of your rate, of your fee. Runoff volume reduction. So that's actually the infiltration we were talking about. So that's the first 15 millimeters of rainfall during a single rainfall event. If that's captured, you can get up to 30% credit for that. Water quality treatment based on best management practices. They have a lot of information about that. Most municipalities have information on their websites about that, and also conservation authorities are a great resource for this type of water quality treatment. Up to 30% for that, and again, operations activities, so 20%. So that you can mix and match those credit options, and they can be based on existing stuff you have. It doesn't have to be new. It can be stormwater management that you have on your property already existing would qualify, and in Mississauga they have it capped at a 50% credit for those activities. Next slide. Okay, and in Guelph, similar peak flow reduction, you can get up to 15%, runoff volume 40%, water quality treatment 15%, and operations and activities 15%. And again, they've also capped their credit for non-residential credit program up to 50% of the fee. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen now, and thanks very much.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Pippi. So this is just sort of to outline the process that we're undergoing in developing this stormwater feasibility study. In terms of the public engagement and education, we really have sort of 3 phases that span from June earlier this year all the way into April 2025 next year. So the first phase was really focused on education and providing background about the stormwater program in Oakville, what the stormwater needs are, why we're exploring those different funding options. So that took place through June, July, and August earlier this year. Then the next stage was really to look at those funding options and then do some analysis. So that's the phase we're in right now. So we did do a workshop with council in September, a very similar presentation to today's, where we outlined what the different fee options that we were considering and what the impact could potentially be to those different property groups. So that moves us into this round of public engagement that we're doing. We really do want to hear back from everyone, our not only our residential, but the non-residential group as well. So we've done a few different engagement opportunities. We had a virtual session open to all of the public on October 1st. Then we had an in-person meeting as well on October the 2nd, and that was held at Glen Abbey. And then this is their 3rd virtual meeting. It's really just focused on the non-residential group, which you were invited to. And in addition, we are doing a survey that's available on our website. There's 2 different types of survey, one for residential and one for non-residential. So we encourage you, if you haven't already, to hop on online and scroll down near the bottom and you'll see the links to those surveys. We're trying to engage as many different residents and property owners as possible so that we can really make a fulsome review of the different comments and feedback we're getting, because that will feed into the recommendation that we'll bring to council in December. The recommendation in December is really just focused on that methodology that we want to lean towards. So whether we continue to just leave it on the tax base and keep the funding split as outlined by Pippi in her slides, or whether we want to shift to a flat method or that variable method. So we'll also be considering how closely aligned the method we recommend lines up with those guiding principles. So that report will go to council in December on that preferred methodology. Then we'll come back out to the public and kind of highlight the option that we preferred and why we've chosen that method, and a little more analysis and information on the impacts of what that option looks like to the different resident groups. And I think at this time as well, we're going to do a little bit more consultation on those different credit and incentive programs and what the different groups would be looking for. So that all that information will be tallied and will inform our final recommendation to council in around April of 2025, when we would propose what the new fees would be, and as well as that implementation plan. Next slide. So just to recap what our next steps are, we'll be reviewing all the feedback we've considered in this round of the public engagement through the different meetings we've held, as well as that survey, so that we can present that preferred funding method to council in December. And then we will head into a second round of public meetings and engagement into the new year of 2025, where we will gather and prepare for our final recommendation in the spring of 2025. And with that, I think that wraps things up, and I'll hand it over to Alicia.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So just to reiterate what Catherine already said, the project team is looking for your feedback on the stormwater funding options and the incentive program options. So please do visit oakville.ca and search stormwater fee to get to the project webpage. And as Catherine said, there's a survey specifically for non-residential property owners. And that is, we're looking for feedback through the survey by October 18th. If you are interested in the information regarding the residential properties, so some of you may be both, commercial property owners and residents of Oakville. So if you're interested in that, the presentation or this presentation that we did last week for residential property owners is available on the website as well. And then, of course, if we do have a few questions in the queue, so that's great. But if there's anything that comes up after this meeting, then please, feel free to reach out to the project team at any point with your comments, concerns, questions at stormwaterfee@oakville.ca. So I'll leave this up on the screen while we go into the Q&A portion now, and that way you have the information available for you if you want to write it down. And then, of course, Rebecca, as mentioned at the beginning, an email will be sent out after this too with the information about how you can access the survey. So definitely please take the time to complete the survey. Okay, so we do have some questions lined up here in the queue that came in throughout the presentation. Just before we get started, we do have one participant on the call today who has identified themselves as a planning student at McMaster University, and they are doing a community engagement assignment. So I did mention that this Q&A was anonymous, but if you are comfortable identifying how you are a member of the community, so whether you're an Oakville resident, small business owner, industrial business owner, etc., if you do feel comfortable identifying that in the question and answer when you're sending in your questions, please feel free to do that. Okay, so let's start at the beginning here with the questions. So the very first question we received was, has the town considered taxation based upon number of persons occupying the residential footprint area? So for example, multi-res versus just the residential area of a single family home in the stormwater fee calculation. Pippi, maybe you can, I'm not sure if that's one that you can take.
I guess the short answer is no. Yeah, keeping it on the taxes just the way it is because it's based on assessed value and not on sort of the amount of runoff coming from the property. We wanted to go to a more equitable look at options that were more equitable. I'm not sure the town's ever considered dividing that property tax based on the number of people. I think there'd be some complications to that if it's the number of people living in a dwelling unit or paying toward. It has to kind of the taxes stay on the owner of the property. So I guess in short, the answer is no, we haven't. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, to be honest. So.
Thanks, Pippi. So has the town considered the effect of increasing the tax regarding stormwater management upon the end cost of new housing for those trying to purchase housing? So the concern is that it would make the housing cost less affordable for purchasers. Catherine, is that something you would like to address?
Sure, I can try, but based on the methodology we are proposing, you could see on one of the slides, the undeveloped lands, which the pre-development, which new houses would be built on, have a runoff coefficient of 0. So they wouldn't be subject to this stormwater fee. It's only once a property is occupied that then they would be responsible for paying for their share of stormwater. It's very same as property taxes as well. You pay property taxes upon occupancy of your home. So there wouldn't necessarily be a cost for the developers to pass on to that cost of purchasing a new home, if I interpreted that question correctly.
Okay, yeah, if there was a different, if that interpretation was not correct, please just follow up with another question for the team here. Hey, have you considered a credit for the return of surface flow to the natural aquifer via, for example, permeable surfaces, with encouraging building by law code requirements or allowances?
So I guess, well, the answer is we've definitely looked at infiltration and getting a credit for infiltration. As I was saying, that's definitely included in most credit programs, and it's something that most municipalities encourage, and the provincial government is potentially going to mandate. And then the town also has in their regulations for development that if you develop a property, you have to match the existing runoff from the property. I don't think the town of Oakville currently has an infiltration amount that they want, but some municipalities do, like Kitchener has introduced an infiltration requirement for all development. But right now, the Oakville has, like all municipalities, now the stormwater criteria that if you develop a property, you have to match the pre-existing runoff from that property if you develop it. So if you pave over some grassed area, you would have to include some storage on your property to compensate for that. So that is part of the development guidelines in all municipalities now. But as far as infiltration goes, that's kind of a newer thing for people. So it's definitely, for me personally, I think one of the biggest advantages with going with a stormwater rate is because you get that opportunity to incentivize those kind of great practices, permeable surfaces and that kind of thing through a credit program. Thanks for that question.
Okay, this one is a two-parter. So let's just start with the first question. So how will Oakville deal with flooding like we had back in July?
So that second group of projects, the 351 million, does include two types of studies. One, the Stormwater Master Plan really focused on South Oakville and looking at more intense weather events, so like the 100-year storm, and what improvements are needed to address or bring to that level of stormwater capacity. So that would help address that type of flooding that we saw earlier this summer in July. So hopefully that answers your question there. I guess the other group of projects is depending where you're experiencing flooding. We're also looking at the creeks and the floodplain areas of those and what we can do along there. So I'd encourage you to go to our website, the oakville.ca, on the stormwater fee page, or no, the rainwater management page has the July 2023 report to council. And in the appendix, it outlines all the different projects and background on those different types of initiatives.
So there is a second part to, or this person had a second question, but I think what you're saying, Catherine, is related to the next question that we have here, which is, this is a residential participant. And so they are asking for clarity, can you confirm that 100% of the future climate change component, I'm assuming the funding, will fund purely physical infrastructure within the borders of the town?
Yes, I can. We're not, we're not looking at any projects or any improvements that go outside of the town's jurisdiction.
And then, so given that this fee is climate change related or caused, so that's the assumption here. Why don't we see any contribution from the federal government through the carbon tax? So the carbon tax collected is supposed to be returned to the province or territory where it is collected.
That's a really good question. In general, the town is seeking out and looking for any grant or federal, provincial government subsidy opportunities that we can. The federal government collects the carbon tax and passes it down to the province, I understand. So we would be subject to the province then allocating a portion of that to us or offering some kind of program where we can submit application to. But we do continue to keep our eye on that. So stay tuned. Hopefully there is more coming our way.
Thank you. I just want to let everyone know that there's currently no questions in the queue. So I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask their questions if they have them. And while we're waiting to see if we have any other questions come in, Pippi, I'm going to put you on the spot and maybe you can talk a little bit more about in terms of the incentive program and the credit program specifically. What are some of the things that in other jurisdictions and other municipalities that people would need to do to kind of make sure that they receive the credit or maintain the credit? So what type of work is usually on the required on the end on the property owner to get that credit?
Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, when municipalities choose to implement credit programs, as you've seen from the examples that I was sharing, they often don't do it for residential properties because it is kind of laborious to monitor and implement and oversee on a regular basis. So they tend to have a staff that's dedicated to overseeing a credit program for part of their job. That's not a full-time employee, but it's part of their job would be to oversee a credit program. So for these non-residential properties, to qualify for a credit, they would have to show what the measure was and how it was designed. So usually when a stormwater pond is designed, it's part of a site plan development. For example, if you have a large parking lot, you probably have an oil grit separator underneath your parking lot, perhaps, or like I was saying, a storage tank. So all of those things would have been designed probably by an engineer. There'd be drawings, there'd be a report, something like that. That would have to be taken to the city, to the stormwater rate folks to look at and review, and they would determine how much of that credit you'd qualify for. And then that has to be redone regularly. So they'd look at the documentation. So, for example, when a stormwater pond is designed, it gives you an approximate how often it should be cleaned out. And if it's not on the documentation, they can use best management practices. That a pond should be cleaned out every 5 years, for example. So you'd have to show that it had been maintained, and then they'd put a mark on the file to say, well, this credit will expire in 5 years unless you show that your stormwater pond has been cleaned out. Same for oil grit separators, need to be cleaned and maintained and emptied. Tanks also can fill up with sediment, super pipes, that kind of thing. So yeah, some kind of documentation on the original design to make sure it was originally designed correctly with some kind of specification or details about what it's intended to do, like how much storage it's providing, what the peak flow reduction is. All that documentation is usually in a design of one of those types of features. And then other ones that are less numerically heavy, or sometimes the green infrastructure ones perhaps can qualify depending on the municipality. So if you have a rain garden, if you have a buffer strip around your parking lot, that's the parking lot might sheet drain, across a grass hill before it hits the ditch, for example, well, those grass buffers do a lot of work for water quality. That might also qualify. So really, we just have a good look at your site plan and your property and discuss it with the municipality. So it's quite labor intensive for the municipality to do the first assessment, but once it's been assessed, it generally stays the same, and it only changes once the property is redeveloped.
Okay, thank you, Pippi. We haven't had any other questions come in, so I think we can probably, oh, I was wrong. We have some questions coming in. My mistake. I wasn't looking at this. Okay, so 2 more questions. If the weather so this is interesting. So if the weather becomes, if it becomes drier in the coming years, will the tax be refunded? That's one question here.
So it's interesting, as a stormwater engineer, drought is a big part of what we're looking at currently with climate change adaptation. So that's a great question. But it is a stormwater issue. So with drought, we get other problems. So our intakes for our treatment plants and water intakes need to be changed, and the assimilative capacity for our wastewater treatment plants and our rivers needs to be adjusted. So droughts are a big problem for managing our systems as well. But I think that's a fair question, and one that we'll have to address in the future potentially if that's the way it goes. Right now, we're seeing more flash flooding as something that we have to deal with, but droughts are certainly predicted in parts of the country. So that's an interesting question.
So I will add, though, part of this sort of whole rainwater management plan is to review those stormwater needs on a periodic basis. So similar to other studies we do, like transportation master plans or development charges studies or recreation parks master plans, we would be reviewing those 30-year needs on every 5 years. So if it needs that the total needs change, and there potentially could be a reduction to the amount needed going forward. Or it could be increased due to drought.
Okay, so the other 2 questions, Catherine, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer these specific ones, but has the town hall performed any cost reductions in spending? And I'm not sure if that means just like globally as a town.
So every year as part of our budget process, we do look across the organization at our needs and our spending and try to reduce as much as possible. We are currently in the process of doing our 2025 budget. And I think those meetings are scheduled for later this month, so you could stay tuned for that. As far as the stormwater fee need and addressing that, I guess I should stipulate that the direction that we've been given by council is at this stage of the game not to reduce our current level of service for any other program area, if that makes sense. So we don't want to increase the stormwater funding at the sacrifice of reducing the spending or the need that we have to maintain our parks or our recreation facilities or our fire service. So hopefully that answers that question. And then the third.
Yes, so the
I'll let you
third
go into the
question
third.
is, yeah, I'm not sure you can do this, answer this one, Catherine, but it's how many new employees were hired at the town since 2020?
So I wouldn't know that off the top of my head, but it is available on our website. If you go to oakville.ca and look at the town budget documents, we do have an appendix that shows total FTEs for the town and how many it's increased. It's on a yearly basis, though you'd have to go back several years to see. But if you're interested in that information, we could have the finance team respond to you.
Okay. And then a question about how to get in touch with the team. I would encourage you to reach out to the stormwater fee at oakville.ca, and you'll be connected to the right person. And then where can I access a recorded version of this meeting? I think we can probably put it on the website like we did with the residential one, but Catherine, I don't think we 100% confirmed that. Is that
Apologize, say that again.
that we could probably post this one online like we did with the residential one?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, great. So we'll get that online as soon as possible after the meeting today. Okay, so that's all of the questions that we have had come in. So I think we could probably wrap up a little early here. If you do have any other questions following this meeting, please do reach out to stormwaterfee@oakville.ca. I think that's going to be your best way to connect with the team. We'll make sure that the questions get to the right person. Once again, I really encourage you to complete the survey by going to oakville.ca to the website and completing the survey by October 18th. Just to answer the last question here, all of the public engagement that we've completed in this round will be in a summary report that at some point I believe will end up going to council as part of the reporting for this project. So thank you again. We really appreciate the time you've taken to participate this afternoon to learn more about the project, and we look forward to connecting with you again at the next round. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.